Greetings from Womack Bible Chapel. 5-minute devotional. Oswald Chambers, my utmost for his highest. The voice of the nature of God. I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Isaiah 6:8. The call of God is the expression of God's nature, not of our nature. When we speak of the call of God, we are apt to forget the most important feature, the nature of the one who calls. There is the call of the sea, the call of the mountains, the call of the great ice barriers, but these calls are only heard by the few. The call is the expression of the nature from which it comes, and we can only record the call if the same nature is in us. The call of God is the expression of God's nature, not of our nature. There are strands of the call of God providentially at work for us, which we recognize and no one else does. It is the threading of God's voice to us in some particular matter, and it is of no use consulting anyone else about it. We have to keep that profound relationship between our souls and God. The call of God is not the echo of my nature. My affinities and personal temperament are not considered. As long as I consider my personal temperament and think about what I am fitted for, I shall never hear the call of God. But when I am brought into relationship with God, I am in the condition Isaiah was in. Isaiah's soul was so attuned to God by the tremendous crisis he had gone through that he recorded the call of God to his amazed soul. The majority of us have no ear for anything but ourselves. We cannot hear a thing God says. To be brought into the zone of the call of God is to be profoundly altered. The call of God is the expression of God's nature, not of our nature. So what we're talking about here is to hear God. We've got to get ourselves untuned from ourselves and tuned into God. We've got to get away from ourselves and more into God. We've got to turn off our own nature and try and plug into God's nature. And the more that we spend plugging into God's nature, the more we will hear God. So the more time we spend in the Word and prayer and worship, the more we will be able to hear God, because it's like a radio. Now, when I was young, before we had digital FM and all that stuff, you used to have old valve radios, and you used to tune them with a wee knob like that, and they were so finicky, and you would just go inch by inch, and if you didn't get it right, you get all this static and buzz, and it was really hard to find. So it's like that with God. You've got to get on the right frequency to connect with God. But when you do, you are talking to God. So he's just talking to you. It's more like a walkie-talkie than a radio. It's a two-way conversation. And God is talking to your spirit and talking to you alone. Now, we looked at, in a previous one I just did last week, are all God's servants eager to obey? We talked about Moses, we talked about Gideon, we talked about Isaiah, we talked about Jeremiah, we talked about Ananias, and about how God spoke to them all individually and their response to God and how they dealt with it and how they talked to God and the problems they had in answering God's call. So it's very individual. As we saw in the talk we did on that, they all had a different relationship with God, and God spoke to them all differently. God addressed them differently, and God dealt with them differently. So God deals with us differently and individually. We are individual personalities. We're individual people. So it's not like one blueprint fits everyone. And it's no good going to your pastor or going to a YouTube person or going to your self-help book to listen to God. That the Holy Spirit is within you when you're saved, and the Holy Spirit talks to God for us, and that's how we can hear God. So that's why it says that the preaching of the cross is foolishness to them of the world, because they can't hear God because they don't have God's Holy Spirit. When you have the Holy Spirit, it says the Holy Spirit groans for us. He communicates to God for us. He gives utterances for us. But we must get tuned into God. And the way to do that is getting to know God and getting to know the call of God. So when we talk about the call of the sea, right? So you're talking about fishermen, mariners, people that love the sea. Why do they hear the call of the sea? Because they understand the sea, because they spend time at sea, because they know the sea. So the sea is a vast, unfathomable, large thing that you'll never completely understand or completely ever see the depth of it or understand all of it. But they know its ways, and they know how it behaves, and they know how their interaction with it makes a difference, and they know ways to weave their way through it, and they know when it's talking to them in the sense of when a storm is coming and when there's good fishing spots and what have you. So it's the same with God, that the more we immerse ourselves in God, the more we can hear God more clearly. And that should be our goal in our Christian life, that we want to hear God more clearly. We want to tune in our wireless or our walkie-talkie to get the right station and to make sure we're listening to the God station and not the world station, not Satan's station. Satan's proclaiming loudly in the world. God's trying to get through. Tune into God.